Right. There we go. So some people may not want to come to a seminar like this because they think, oh, well, we got everything under control. And if we admit that we have fears, that we have anxieties, that we are frustrated, that we are worn out, well, you know, we want to be strong. I can tell you that the entrepreneurs that I'm working with, and even faith-based entrepreneurs, they have at least twice as much anxiety as the average population. They have more mental health issues, more mental health concerns, whether it's suicidal thoughts or overwhelm, you name it, they are very, very stressed. So even the people who appear on the surface to be very successful, like I had this client, he was 70 years old, he was taking anxiety medication, but he had such a successful business, he did $90 million in sales a year. And he was very wealthy, everything was fine, but it affected his health. And so it's something that we need to address. And basically everybody is dealing with to one degree or another. I remember when life went pretty well for us, you know, when we were relatively newly married. We had moved to Tennessee, to a beautiful area in East Tennessee. I had a wonderful job for a German automotive company. I was an engineer by trade. I'd always wanted to have a job that paid well enough to where if my wife wanted to stay at home, she could stay at home. We had a nice home, and we were near the mountains. We were near a lake. And everything just seemed to go smoothly. And we thought, well, you know, life was a little rough before. I didn't get married until I was 38 years old, so a lot of dreams were not fulfilled. There was anxiety around that. Am I going to be, you know, single for the rest of my life and all those things? But at that time, it seemed like everything just came together and life was just good. Until 2009. You know, in the years 2008, 2009, the automotive industry tanked. It went from 17 million vehicles a year in sales to 10 million. So about, you know, it was huge. And the company I worked for, we had 3 people pretty much doing the same job. But I had the least seniority, even though I was there 10 years already. So I had to be let go. I never thought that would happen. I thought, okay, you've got a good education, you're an engineer, you're working for a solid German company that's not into hire and fire, you should be fine. No worries. So my financial security was based on that. You know, I was going to do everything that I could do to be a good provider. And then just like with a rug was pulled under my feet and things started to sort of unravel. So I lost my job, so financial security went out the window. But it was interesting, I was worried about our finances. But my wife was not worried. She wasn't worried at all. So what was the difference? What was my belief behind the fear that I had around money? My belief was that we may not have enough. And her belief was that we will always have enough. So that changed things a little bit. But things were not easy that year. A couple of months later, I broke my leg. Mowing the grass, stepping into a big hole. My wife said, hey, you should hire a landscaper to do this. And I said, well, no, I can save the $80 and do it myself. Those were the most expensive $80 that I ever saved. So I broke my leg. I was an involuntary couch potato for 3 months at least. And then on top of that, we had a fallout with the church that we attended, and things just were not going well in many, many different ways. But so how do you deal with these situations? You know, the realization came that things are just not always going to be just fine. Even if you always try to strive to follow God's ways, life is not always rosy. It reminds me of the song, I beg your pardon, I never promised you a rose garden. Right, that's what I was thinking about when things started to change.
You did pretty well with that.
Thank you. Now I need to figure out on how, there we go. Okay, and so, because I also believed in this scripture, you know, which said, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And there's the thing, that's what I expected. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So life's going to be easy, and it's light if we follow God, right? So that was the thinking. And then the other verse that I was thinking about was this. The thief does not come except to steal and kill and to destroy. But he says, I have come that they may have life and that may have it more abundantly. And we felt like, yes, we had it more abundantly because we followed God, right? There's blessings and cursings, and you do the right things, and you feel like you're going to have life more abundantly. What does that mean, though? But then we realized what we had expected didn't really come through. And studying the Word made us realize, is the burden really easy, and is life even light? Is that really true? Well, what we are told here, what to expect. And a lot of how we respond to life and how we feel about life has something to do with what we expect. And Robert will excuse me for making that explanation, but when I went to Kenya for the feast this year, I knew what to expect because I was there already in April. We went to the facility and everything. And I knew this was a third world country, and you have to rough it compared to how life is here in America. But there was another group of people who came from Georgia, and some of them were never in Africa before. So they were much more irritated, or, they didn't enjoy or complaining about things the way things were. I just said TIA.
This is Africa.
This is Africa. So I knew what to expect, and I put my focus. So my focus was not, probably for the first time in my life, the main focus of the feast was simply to serve, and was not to have luxury or convenience or comfort. It was probably the most, the least comfortable from a physical perspective feast that I've ever been to, from a luxury perspective or any of that. But from a spiritual aspect, the connections I made with people and the interactions I had with them, it was the most fulfilling. So that's really what. So it's so important that we realize what to expect. And what are we told to expect in this life? We are expected that's why I put it up on the screen if you want to take notes. We are expected to have to go through tribulation. That's what we can expect. And there's nothing easy or light about going through tribulation, is there? And we are also expected to take up our cross and follow Him. There's nothing easy or light about following Him. And when it says, a man's foes shall be they of his own household, he that loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. So when our foes are people of our own household, that's not a life that's easy. I mean, some of you have probably had issues with relatives, very difficult time coming into the faith, and relatives don't agree with it, and there are splits in the family. And that's definitely not light or easy. And then we are expected to face persecution as well. And that's something that to some degree we already experience in this life. And some of you may have had issues with the Sabbath at work or in your business. So there's nothing easy or light about being persecuted. And then when we look at the Apostle Paul, what he went through, and I'll just try to move this picture a little bit if I can. It does move. Anyway. He writes about the persecutions he went through, the trials. He was, received 40 stripes 5 times, and he was beaten with rods, and he was stoned, and he suffered shipwreck, and all those things. And then he said that they were hard pressed on every side. That's nothing light or easy about that. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, nothing easy about that, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Being struck down, there's nothing easy or light about that. So the Apostle Paul himself experienced a lot of hardship. and the life was not easy or light. And then in Revelation, we are told that in the future what to expect. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. That has happened in the past, and that's probably going to happen again in the future. Nothing light or easy necessarily to expect here. So what do we need to expect? And I think what I have found is dissecting these verses in Matthew 11 a little bit more. It showed a different picture, and a picture that helps me to understand it better. So what I did is I looked at some of the key words in the first verse, in verse 28. What do they really mean? What does the Greek word really mean? So the three words are labor, heavy laden, and rest. So the word for labor that is used here, the Greek word, is kopiao. That means to grow weary, tired, exhausted with toil or burdens of grief. So it's more like the anguish, the emotional anguish that we experience when we go through trials. It's not the same word that's used, the word ergatsomai, that is more for physical labor. We do something, we shovel snow or whatever. That word would be ergatsomai. Now, some people would probably be agonized over having to shovel snow, but maybe that was a bad example. But it's more the being weary, the being grieved. That's really the meaning. And then the next word is fortizo, which means to load one with a burden of rights and unwarranted precepts, creating spiritual anxiety. What this is basically about is the pressure that we experience as believers in this life. We are pressured in this world to conform to Satan's way of to his way of thinking. And we are being, persecuted, for example. We are stressed. We may feel like we are pressured to compromise on our job with the Sabbath and not just the Sabbath, other ethical dealings. We may be pressured. For example, I was involved in purchasing. I was pressured to squeeze the last penny out of a supplier and treat him very unfairly and things like that. So that's a burden that we experience. And then anapao, that is the same word for rest that is also used for Sabbath rest. Now on the Sabbath, it's not like we just stay in bed all day, right? I mean, maybe some people do. But it's really the focus is on a shift in activity. It's something differently that we do normally. So in other words, what he gives us the opportunity, if we go with him, if we walk with him, he will give us a purposeful job to do, a different activity. He will give us rest in the sense where we don't have to compromise. As an example, when I was fired at the age of 59, because I was not compromising on my job with certain things. And so I was pushed out. And now I'm free. There was a lot of pressure to do things that I didn't want to do. And now I feel so much more liberated. Yes, I'm very active still. I do a lot of stuff. I write books, I give speeches, I do those kinds of things, and I do coaching, and I have a real estate business, all those things. It's not like, even though I'm 66, I'm not sitting on my butt, so to speak. It's not that kind of rest. But it's purposeful, it's meaningful, and it feels fulfilling what I'm doing now as opposed to before. So that's sort of the difference in meaning here when you look at this verse. Now, we can translate it roughly this way. Come to me all you who grow weary, tired, exhausted with toil or burdens of grief, and are loaded with a burden of rights and unwarranted spiritual anxiety. That means pressures to conform to the world. And I will give you permission to cease from any movement or labor. That means the kinds of activities really that are against our beliefs in order to recover and collect your strength. So you can now have a change of activity. Now the next one is verse 29. Let's look at that. And let's look at the key words in this one. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So when we have a yoke, I'm thinking about two oxen. Usually when you put two oxen together, and somebody, a lady who grew up Amish has told me this, you have an experienced oxen and a mature oxen, and you have a young oxen. And you put the yoke on them. And so the mature oxen guides the younger one. That's what we have to keep in mind. And the focus here is, you see, and learn from me. So you take on the yokes that you learn from me. We are the inexperienced oxen, and our Savior is the experienced oxen, so to speak. We are yoked together with him. And by sharing the same yoke with the older ox, as it says here, the young ox will not only learn from the seasoned ox, but the experienced ox does the harder workload, the majority of the load, which sometimes some of the load we don't have to bear ourselves. Our Savior is helping us to carry the load. Since the older one leads, the younger one ox does not have to wonder what to do. If we are connected and yoked together with our Savior, we don't have to wonder what to do. It becomes clear. And we looked at the word anapausis as well already. And psyche is basically the breath of life, the seat of the feelings and desires. So we will find rest primarily, I guess, in our mind. But as we know, when we have mental stress and emotional stress, it also has an effect on our physical energy, doesn't it? It was in November last year that I had severe back pain all of a sudden, and I could not tell where it came from. The chiropractor did not see a great anomaly that would have explained that back pain. It was horrendous, and it was lasted for like a whole week, and then the second week it got a little better. But there was nothing, let's say, in the past I would do some hard work on a weekend in the yard, work on a Sunday, and then Monday morning I have some back pain. But then it would usually go away after a day or two. At least after I went to the chiropractor, it would go away. But this time it didn't go away. And then a woman in the church, she told me about a book that she read about back pain. And the book was written by a medical doctor, and he did a lot of research on back pain. And he came to the conclusion that over 90% of back pain is psychosomatic. And so a good friend of mine, I try to figure this out. A good friend of mine is a therapist, and said, I have this issue with my back pain, it's psychosomatic, but I can't figure out where I'm off here. And she discussed it with me, and she asked, okay, what was going on, what in your life when did it start, and so on and so forth. I said, yeah, you're right. There were two things. One was I had a coaching client, and he was my favorite. He was my favorite in the sense that he paid me a lot of money, double than what other clients paid, because he was a very wealthy man that I told you about earlier. But all of a sudden, he agreed to do another year of coaching, and then all of a sudden I get a text from him, I heard this really good sermon, you need to watch it, I think that takes care of it. And that was it. So I was like, wait a minute, so maybe I'm not as good a coach as I thought I was, and started to doubt myself at all those questions. Basically what I believed the lie that this one sermon which I looked at, which I didn't get much out of it, to be honest, that would make as much a difference as 1 year of coaching. It was a lie that I believed in. So that was one issue, and that has had its effect. And then the other one was, we had a closing scheduled on a house that we were in the real estate business that fell through. And on the day of closing. And so I had some financial worries again. And all those things, and then just a week later we got a better offer. And it was a blessing, that it didn't close. But the thing is this, to me, it was ingenious in a way on how God revealed anxieties to me through the back pain that I was not otherwise aware of. You probably read this in Psalm 139, where David says, know my anxieties. Well, and sometimes our anxieties are subconscious. On the surface, we got this under control. Yeah, of course, I'm not going to be anxious, whatever. But instead of just really facing what we're anxious about and dealing with it and realizing that it's usually a false belief that's behind it, a false or limiting belief, that we can identify that and then release that. But we have to admit it. It has to come out. And that's can sometimes be a very painful experience to let it out. Just like David, David cried, rivers of water, came down. He cried about it, but then he released it. He let it go. And so that's what I came to the conclusion about. Anyway, so the next one is in verse 30. It says, and that's the one that we read earlier, where we said, well, wait a minute, is it easy? And is it light to go through all the stuff that we are promised to have to go through? What's interesting, when we look at the word that's translated as easy, it's the Greek word krestos. It means useful, virtuous, good, benevolent, kind, has all these character traits. It does not say it's easy, but it has a purpose. Just like when we go through trials, it's not easy, but they have a purpose. When things are hard, it's not easy, but there's a purpose behind it. And then it says, "In my burden is light." Actually, the word light is deceiving. As we said earlier, it's nothing is light about persecution and all the things that we are to expect in life. But it has a different meaning, really. It's not light. It says here to drive. The Greek word is light in weight, quick, agile. The analogy that I like to use is this. We have some woods around the house, and sometimes I would cut a tree and chop it up for firewood. And then when I cut logs, sometimes when they're very thick, they're pretty heavy. And I'm not that strong, but our son lifts weights. And I said, "Oh, Daniel, can you help me carry this log?" "Oh, come on, Dad, let me do it." And he picks it up like it's a matchbox. And so, but the log is still as heavy as it was when I tried it, right? But with God's help, we can carry the log. It doesn't get any easier, but we can carry it with His help. He gives us the strength. I remember, I think it was Jim Rohn who said one time, he said, "Don't wish things were easier. Wish you were stronger."
Yes.
And that's what we are supposed to be. We tend to, in our culture, and I'm fully guilty of that, the focus was comfort and ease. I want to plan for retirement so I can relax in Florida, sit on the beach. That's often the focus. And if our focus is on comfort and ease, then we're dreading it, and then it doesn't make sense. But so it's not necessarily light, our burden, but it has purpose. It's the word for drive, the wind driving ships or clouds, or sailors propelling a vessel, and so on. So when we look at this word again, at this sentence here in Matthew 11:30, we read, we can rewrite it this way: "For my yoke is virtuous, good and kind, and my burden is driving, propelling, carrying towards a purpose, towards a goal." So there's meaning behind it. It's not light, it's not easy, but there's meaning and purpose behind it. So as I said, it's about managing expectations. The same thing with this verse there that we read earlier in John 10, verse 10, that we will have life more abundantly. What does that mean? What does that word abundant mean? The word means, and there's several meanings here, exceeding some number or measure or rank or need, over and above, more than is necessary in many ways, exceedingly abundant, supremely, all those things, superior, extraordinary, surpassing in uncommon, more excellent, more eminent, more remarkable. So we can really translate this as saying more meaningful, more purposeful, not necessarily more wealth, pleasure, comfort, ease, or convenience. You know, those two verses that I mentioned, Matthew 11, 28 through 30, and this one is often used by the health, wealth, and prosperity people. Yeah, just go do the altar call and life's gonna be easy. So, again, what we want to live a life that is filled with purpose, not necessarily easy. It went back, yeah, because I wanted to to take it back. But sometimes we still, as long as our focus is on ease and comfort, that means then we are driven by a lot of our fears. When we don't expect persecution or martyrdom or any of these things, we will strive to avoid all those things because we fear them. And the key is that we don't necessarily fear those things anymore, that we don't fear certain pains. And I want to look at this a little bit because some of the things that we fear, when we fear things, fear often makes us go in the opposite direction of what would help us avoid what we fear. For example, the greatest fear that men have, and I think it's because it's related to the greatest need that we have, is the fear of rejection. We are created for connection. We are created for connection with God. We are created for connection with other people. And so the fear, that's the greatest purpose. And so the fear of rejection is the greatest fear that people have. So many times, just for example, if the guy is afraid the girl's going to reject him, he will never ask her out for a date. As a result, nothing ever is going to happen, right? If you're afraid not to fail an interview, you're not going to apply for the job that you want. And if you're afraid to be lonely that evening, or if you're afraid of rejection when you ask your friends to go out for dinner, well, you're going to sit by yourself all alone anyway, because you were too afraid to ask. So the fear, that is Satan's way of trying to hold us back from what we're expected to do. And we have to analyze ourselves also about the different fears that we have about doing something that has certain risks involved. Because we're not always promised that everything will just be fine and dandy. For example, we have helped some families, immigrants from Germany who homeschooled. With one family, it worked out great, wonderful model family, really, really happy. The other family turned out to be a total disaster. So we're not guaranteed that the outcome will always be what we hope for. So there's outcome pain that we're afraid of. We are afraid that when we go through something, like Annika talked about exercising, for example, it's going to be hard. It's hard to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do those things, and do the things that are not comfortable for us. It's hard to do that. And so we're afraid of the process pain. And as a result, we have more physical pain down the road if we don't do certain things. Or loss pain. We are afraid to lose something. We are afraid to lose the pleasure of the donut if we restrict ourselves, whatever it may be. We're afraid to lose something. The fear drives us to focus on the pain rather than the potential gain. And then, of course, the fear of death, that's the greatest fear. And the fear of death, that is the greatest slave master. And we saw that around COVID times, Every government, every dictatorship that is trying to control you, they will use fear. And fear of death is the easiest way to control people. When you think about it, dictatorships can only exist because there's not enough people who are not afraid to die. So it tells us in Hebrews, you can write down that scripture, that the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. So it is the great slave master when people have the fear of death. And in Job, Satan said to God that a man has, will all that a man has, he will give for his life. You know, the fear of death is so great. But then we are admonished, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, cannot kill our spirit, cannot kill our chance for eternal life. And we are also admonished, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And sometimes fear, when we relate that to anxiety, a lot of anxieties we experience, we have to always ask ourselves, what belief is behind that anxiety? The example that I mentioned earlier, the belief behind the anxiety that I had around money was that we may not have enough. It was a lie. It was a lie. My wife's belief was we will always have enough. So she was not worried. So she didn't let go of the worry. She let go of the false belief behind the worry. And that's how we have to think. We have to analyze our thoughts behind our anxieties that we have. I want to give you just a few things, sort of concepts I want to share with you that can help you deal with anxieties and fears in your life. And fatigue always comes in when we are fearful, when we have low energy, emotional energy. It always affects our physical energy as well. Mental, emotional, and physical energy, they're all very strongly correlated with each other, as you know yourself, as you have experienced. So sometimes we get very frustrated because we're experiencing a setback. Something's not working out the way we are hoping. So, but there are blessings behind setbacks in our lives. And we are told, count it all joy when you fall into diverse trials and things like that. So it's a biblical concept. So the number one is it could be a learning process. God knows what we need to learn. So he will give us an experience. It looks like a setback, looks like a failure, but it's actually a blessing because we are learning something that he wants us to learn. The second one is it's a redirection towards something better. It's necessary sometimes to be redirected so that for a new beginning, for a new relationship. I was so heartbroken at the time when this girl broke up with me. But a few years later, I was so glad when I met my wife that she did break up with me. So it was a blessing that I didn't see at the time. When I lost my job, I was stressed at the moment, but in the end, it was a great blessing. So there may be a redirection. So think about that. Sometimes it's a correction. We are neglecting some part of our lives, whether it's finances, health, or relationships, and things fall apart. And so we are said, okay, now you're basically forced into a situation where you have to fix it. You have to give it attention. If we don't give those things attention on a regular basis, intentionally, it will get our attention. So it may be a correction. Or we should always ask ourselves this question when we have a setback, when we have when we feel like something has failed of what we try to pursue. Which is it? Which of these blessings is behind it? And sometimes it's a setup. We may just be prepared. This may not be what we do for the rest of our lives. This may be just a setup for what God has in store next for us. It's a preparation. Like I worked in the auto industry for almost 30 years, in the corporate world. And in the end, it was not a fun job anymore. But it was a setup. I learned so much in the process. I learned so much about the difference between a good corporate culture and a bad corporate culture. And is helping me so much in my coaching now. And then another one is when we deal with worry and anxiety. You all heard this. And where Christ says, do not worry. And what I find very interesting is this. It's a command from him. But we all know that's not easy. But the first reason that he gives us not to worry is it's irrational. He said, you cannot add 1 cubit to your stature by worrying about something. So that's something he tells us. And the next one is in Philippians 4, 6 through 9. And I'll show this slide. Oops, it doesn't show everything. But that is something that back then when I lost my job in 2009 is something that I was not that familiar with this, and it was pointed out to me. And I read this over and over and over again, sometimes several times a day for a long time to really internalize it. And it says, so be anxious for nothing. For nothing. How? In everything by prayer and supplication. So we go to God with it. With thanksgiving, and here's the key, with thanksgiving. The joy, which is one of the character traits of the fruit of the Spirit, goes up when we have more thanksgiving. How our whole mental and emotional energy goes up when we express thankfulness, gratitude. You ask my wife, sometimes people ask her, why are you always so happy? Why are you always so joyful? Well, she's had a gratitude journal for decades. Somebody said once, the height of your joy depends on the depth of your gratitude. So being grateful. So if we are grateful and we make all our requests be made known to God by prayer and supplication, then as a result of that, the peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard our hearts and minds. In the next few verses, he said, the Apostle Paul tells the Philippians to dwell on those positive things. I sometimes say the Apostle Paul was the first positive psychologist. He said, think of these things, positive things. And remember, sometimes people say, oh, it's easy for you to say. Well, it wasn't easy for Paul to say. He wrote this when he was in jail. We have to remember that. And he still said, dwell on the positive things. Why? It increases your capacity to do positive things. If you have a positive mindset, you have an optimistic mindset, you will be able to accomplish more. You will have a higher level of emotional, mental energy to do positive things with God's help. And then he said at the end, and the peace of God will be with you. So one other concept I quickly want to share, that's a story from a woman I read about it many, many years ago. I forgot her name now. She was somebody who in her early 30s, she dealt with major depression. She had even suicidal thoughts. And she did not go to therapy or anything. She just started to analyze her own thoughts. And what she realized by analyzing her thoughts, that she was always complaining about everything. Said, oh, people should be more kind, or this shouldn't be happening, or I should have this and that. And it was always like, she couldn't accept anything the way it was. And then she started to, when she analyzed her thoughts, she put every one of her thoughts into one of 3 buckets. The first bucket was my business. So whatever I have some control over, or whatever I'm responsible for, that's my business. That's what I will focus on. The other bucket was other people's business. That's something that I can control and have no responsibility for. So it's in somebody else's bucket. And the third bucket is God's business, where only He has anything, where only He can do anything about it. If a volcano erupts, we haven't figured out how to stop it yet. So that's God's business. So what she started to do is she put all her thoughts into these 3 buckets, and she left the first and the second, everything that was in the first and the second bucket, she prayed about it and left it there. And she just focused on her bucket. I remember one time I was involved in a real estate deal, and there were 3 parties involved and got pretty messy. Worst case scenario was I could have lost $20,000. Best case scenario, I could have made $50,000 out of the deal. And it consumed me, the worry about how to move forward. And then I talked with my coach, who was a person of faith as well, and he said, so you left it there, huh? You didn't leave it there, you took it back. What do you mean? Well, I'm sure, you being a person of faith, you took it to God. And since you're still so worried about it, you took it back, right? I said, you're right. I took it back. So I decided to leave it there, pray about it, and then leave it there. And that changed everything. That changed everything. So that's one concept. We can just focus on what is within our power and within our responsibility. And then we accept the other things. We leave it with God and we accept it. And here's the thing. Sometimes people say, oh, I can't accept this behavior or this person, or it can't forgive because of what they did. For acceptance does not mean we like it. It does not mean we approve of it. It does not mean we support it. It does not mean we condone it. It does not mean that we agree with it. It does not mean that it meets our standards. All it means, it's not in my bucket. And we just accept it and just have peace with it. God will take care of it. And sometimes when we deal with frustration, that's the last thought, we have a long to-do list, or we have things that we want to accomplish during the day. And hardly anything gets done that we had accomplished. And so we feel like, oh, this was not a successful day. And what I have told my clients sometimes, they can redefine a successful day into saying, a successful day is a day in which we responded to each situation in a way that is pleasing to God. That's a successful day, because it has helped us to continue to grow and become more and more like Him. In that sense, what can be more meaningful success than a transformation of our own mind, of having become more aligned with God and be more in tune with Him. So those are the thoughts that I had. I was just, the door open and said, you got 2 minutes. That was about a minute and a half ago. I'm around. Because we have to leave. There will be another one, I was told, in here, apparently. So that's why I have to close it. But if you want to, what I plan on doing is, since this is recorded, that I will upload it on the, as I mentioned earlier. And if you send me an email, I'd be happy then to send you a link to it. And I'd be happy to also send you the slides if you feel like you could use them, or share with somebody if you felt that this was of any value. All right? And I will be outside a little bit if somebody has some questions, but we'll vacate the room for the next seminar. You had a quick one?
I just want to say one quick thing about the buckets, the
Yeah.
3 buckets I learned in 12-step recovery. My business, your business, God's business. Keep my nose on my own face.
Yeah, thank you.
Handy little slogan to help with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Reinhard.
You're welcome.